quiet, diligent employee of a large catering company in Chicago. She works 16 hours a day, taking the hardest shifts. And then one evening, when everyone else has left, she turns to the chef with a request. "Can I have some of the leftovers? I didn't have time to buy dinner." The company's CEO, a businessman with strong principles and a belief that everyone has an equal chance, overhears this. But something in Sophia's voice disturbs him. He decides to find out more. And the next evening, he follows her. In a bustling corner of Chicago, where towering glass buildings and busy streets serve as a constant reminder of the city's relentless pace, there exists a large, highly reputable catering company known for its flawless service, gourmet displays, and meticulous attention to detail. Amid the whirlwind of orders, elaborate events, and ever-changing menus, one employee stands out, not by fanfare or boastful proclamations but by the quiet consistency of her work. Sofia Martinez is known to all in the company as the embodiment of dedication. Every day, regardless of the clock or the chaos, she arrives early, dons her crisp uniform with a calm smile, and steps into a world where precision, passion, and perseverance dominate. Sofia's day begins before the city stirs. Long before sunrise, when the streets are still draped in darkness, she slips quietly into the company's sprawling kitchen. Here, amidst the hum of industrial ovens and the rhythmic clatter of utensils, Sofia works tirelessly. While many of her colleagues may dash in and out with hurried energy, she moves with an almost meditative focus, measuring, chopping, stirring, and plating with a dexterity honed over years of practice. Despite the long hours and the physical demands of her job, she never complains. Instead, she accepts each task with a gentle determination that defies the exhaustion of 16-hour workdays and the burden of the toughest shifts. Her diligence is not just about punctuality or perfection, but about an enduring commitment to putting her best self into every plate she prepares. Whether it's ensuring the salad is dressed just right or that the intricate pastry designs for a gala event are immaculate, Sofia carries an unspoken promise of reliability. Her co-workers sometimes remark in hushed tones how she seems to know precisely when something isn't right, quietly correcting errors before they even reach the attention of management. Despite her unassuming presence, her work ethic has become an integral, if overlooked, pillar of the company's success. It was one such evening, after a grueling day when the kitchen was abuzz with last-minute orders and every station was operating at full capacity, when almost everyone had finally left the building. The lights in the expansive kitchen dimmed one by one as the final staff members departed. Yet, Sofia remained behind, as she always did when the world had quieted and the undercurrent of fatigue became too heavy for a proper meal. With her shift officially over by the clock and her mind still buzzing with the demand of the day, she realized she had once again forgotten to make time for a proper dinner. In that rare moment of vulnerability, Sofia approached the head chef, a man known for his brisk efficiency and intimidating presence, and, in her soft and measured voice, asked, "Can I have something from the leftovers? I didn't get a chance to buy dinner." The request was simple, almost routine, yet it held a quiet plea for sustenance amid the exhausting night. It was a request that spoke volumes about her personal sacrifice. While she poured her energy into ensuring every guest's event was perfect, her own basic needs were left to the sidelines. Unbeknownst to Sofia, her gentle words carried far beyond the echoing walls of the kitchen that night. Across the dimly lit corridors of the catering company's headquarters, Robert Henley, the company's general director, renowned for his strict belief that everyone has equal opportunities, happened to overhear her request. Robert was a man of solid principles, a businessman who prided himself on running a company where every employee should be provided the same chance to thrive. Yet, as he listened to the hushed tone with which Sofia's voice trembled, a disquiet began to settle in him. Something in her measured request, in the quiet dignity of her need, awakened in him a stark contradiction between the company's proclamations of equality and the unseen hardships faced by those who worked silently in the background. That single, fragile request was a moment of revelation for Robert. Here was a woman who embodied the very soul of dedication, a quiet force who had given herself entirely to the success of the company, day after day, yet now found herself too worn to even secure a meal. As he pondered her soft-spoken plea, doubts began to murmur in the corridors of his mind. Had he, and by extension the company, truly provided equal opportunities for everyone? Or had the relentless demands of the business created a system where those at the bottom, quiet, diligent souls like Sophia, were left to fend for themselves? That night, after the echo of the kitchen had faded and the stark reality of the empty, silent corridors set in, Robert Henley's thoughts would not let go of the humble voice he had heard. As he stood in his office overlooking the glittering city lights, he stared thoughtfully into the darkness, troubled by the disparity between what the company preached and the quiet truths that now surfaced from within its walls. The next morning, as the catering company's busy kitchen buzzed with the early rush of orders and the aroma of freshly prepared dishes, the events of the previous night lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed them. In the dim glow of the after-hours silence, Sophia's soft request for leftovers had stirred something unexpected, not only in the heart of the head chef, but also in the corridors of upper management. Chef Marco Alvarez, the no-nonsense culinary leader known for his exacting standards, had heard Sophia's humble plea while he was conducting his final rounds in the kitchen. He paused for a moment, wiping a smear of sauce from his cheek, his usually stern eyes softening at the sound of her gentle voice. Though accustomed to the clamor of commercial kitchens, he was not immune to the small human gestures that often went unnoticed. "Leftovers isn't much," he muttered to himself at first, but even he couldn't ignore the poignancy in her tone. A quiet admission of exhaustion and a simple need for nourishment in a long day's work. In his own gruff way, Marco felt a twinge of regret that even as he orchestrated perfection for high-end events, someone as dedicated as Sophia might be forced to forego her own care. Later that morning, while the team gathered for a routine briefing in the staff office, Marco pulled Sophia aside. In the subdued lighting of a small meeting room painted with faded company blues, he broached the subject in a hushed, compassionate tone. "Sophia, you always manage to finish every shift without a single word of complaint," he began, his voice low yet laced with genuine concern. "But last night, I couldn't help but notice you asking for something to eat. Is everything all right?" Sophia's eyes, usually steady and focused on her meticulous work, flickered with momentary hesitation before she replied, I didn't have time to grab dinner, chef. The shift was so long, and my schedule, it just slips by sometimes." Her voice remained soft, almost apologetic, as though she feared that admitting her needs might be seen as a weakness in the relentless rhythm of the kitchen. Marco's face, creased around his eyes as if carved from years of responsibility, softened a fraction more. "Listen, girl," he said, leaning against the doorframe and choosing his words carefully. "We take care of our guests, but sometimes we forget to take care of ourselves. I can arrange for you to have something prepared, officially if you want. We have a system, but—" He trailed off, a long pause punctuating the unspoken acknowledgement that the company's structure rarely allowed for personal exceptions. Before Sophia could answer, a few figures passed by outside the meeting room. Among them was Robert Henley, the company's general director, whose steps and measured expressions rarely betrayed his inner contemplations. That morning, Robert had been unsettled by the faint echoes of Sophia's request that he'd overheard the previous evening. A man of firm principles and vocal about equal opportunity for every employee, he felt increasingly troubled by the potential discrepancy between the company's polished exterior and the hidden struggles of its most diligent workers. Later that day, while reviewing the company's performance metrics in his spacious office overlooking the city skyline, Robert found himself unexpectedly drawn to review the reports of the catering operations. He noted the remarkable consistency in the kitchen, but also a small but recurring detail: an unusual absence of internal requests for basic needs being met for those laboring away on the toughest shifts. Something in that oversight nagged at him, a dissonance he could no longer ignore. Determined to uncover the real stories behind his department's silent heroes, Robert decided to discreetly follow up on the matter. That evening, under the pretext of finalizing some administrative notes, he requested permission to observe the nighttime operations of the catering crew. "I want to see our work in action," he told his trusted manager. masking his deeper intent with the standard corporate excuse of quality control. Yet even as he spoke, Robert's mind churned with the memory of Sophia's soft-spoken request and the delicate vulnerability in her tone. It was not merely a question of leftover food. It was a sign of a personal struggle that had been unnoticed in the grand ledger of the company's profits. That night, after the majority of employees had left and the immense kitchen fell silent except for the hum of refrigerators and the distant clatter of cleaning crews, Robert quietly trailed behind the departing staff. He made his way to the service area where Sophia was about to leave. His observant eyes caught sight of her pausing by a small counter, gently packing the remaining food containers that were destined for the event the next day. As she completed her tasks with quiet efficiency, Robert stepped forward, his presence discreet but unmistakable. Before he could address her directly, he overheard a tender, almost childlike whisper from somewhere within the building, a sound he recognized as belonging to one of the younger employees. Peeking discreetly, he found a heartwarming scene. Sophia, carrying a neatly wrapped paper bag, entered the modest break room where a little girl, her 10-year-old sister, by the look of it, sat at a small table, eyes wide with hope. "Is it again from those leftovers?" the child whispered, voice hushed with both worry and excitement. "We won't tell anyone, I promise," she added quickly, as if afraid the truth might bring further hardship. The sincerity and vulnerability in the child's tone struck Robert deeply, and in that moment his confident facade faltered. Lowering his gaze, he stepped back, a mix of regret and determination swirling within him. This was not the equal, nurturing environment he had championed. It was a hidden reality that he had long overlooked. That clandestine observation sealed his resolve. He would not stand by while the seeming promises of equal opportunity proved hollow for those working behind the scenes. Robert decided, then and there, that he would ensure the company's policies would be reformed to truly support every individual, not just in theory but in practice. And quietly, under the shadow of a Chicago night, he vowed to follow Sophia's story further, to understand the depth behind her silent strength. Later that same evening, after the last of the catering crew had departed and the bustling kitchen of the company had fallen silent, Robert Henley found himself unable to shake the memory of Sophia's quiet plea. The image of her soft, almost inaudible request for leftover food weighed heavily on him. Determined to understand the life behind the immaculate facade of corporate success, he resolved to follow her during her next shift cycle. Under the pretense of routine quality checks, Robert trailed Sophia as she left the sleek, modern building and merged with the throng of Chicago night commuters. The brisk air outside was a sharp departure from the controlled warmth of the catering company's corridors. Robert's senses gradually adjusted to the rugged textures. Peeling paint on time-worn brick walls, dim streetlights casting long shadows on pavement in need of repair, and the unmistakable smell of a working-class neighborhood. His mind, so used to boardroom strategies and financial forecasts, now absorbed every detail of the modest district where Sophia lived. After following her through a maze of back alleys and lesser-known streets, Robert finally reached a modest apartment block, a nondescript building with faded exterior paint and a worn staircase that creaked underfoot. The building exuded an air of humility completely foreign to the opulence of his own offices. Here, the lives of those working tirelessly behind the scenes unfolded in stark contrast to the polished veneer of corporate boardrooms. Peering discreetly through a ground-floor window, Robert was struck by the intimate scene inside. The living room, modestly lit by a single warm table lamp, looked more like a small communal space than a private home. The minimal furnishings, a threadbare sofa, a rickety wooden table, and barely any decorative touches, spoke of a daily struggle against scarcity rather than luxury. On the small table lay a paper bag, its contents sparse. Only 2 plain buns, carelessly arranged yet cherished as if they were a rare feast. The barely heated stove in the adjacent corner, its surface cool and uninviting, underscored the absence of a proper warmed meal. As Robert continued to observe, a soft murmur drifted from within the cramped apartment, carrying the unmistakable cadence of a young voice. He recognized the quiet timbre immediately, a hesitant blend of hope and resignation. Peeking further inside, His eyes caught sight of a scene that solidified the reality he had never considered. Sophia's 10-year-old sister, small and cautious, was speaking in a whisper. "Is it again from those leftovers? We won't say anything, I promise," the child murmured, her voice tinged with both excitement and an unspoken understanding of their living conditions. The promise was made as if to shield her siblings from further worry. A vow forged in the innocence of childhood, yet heavy with the burden of necessity. Beyond the immediate scene at the table, Robert's gaze widened as he took in the entire family tableau. In one corner of the living room, an elderly woman, clearly a grandmother, rested in a creaking armchair, her frail form wrapped in a thin blanket. Her eyes, though tired, held a spark of quiet dignity amidst the illness that seemed to have sapped her strength. The worn-out surroundings, with peeling wallpaper and a persistent chill that suggested a heating system that was either inefficient or long overdue for repair, painted a picture of everyday hardship that contrasted starkly with the opulent promises of equal opportunity that Robert had long championed. The scene was raw and unsettling. A humble home where sacrifice was an everyday reality. Two younger sisters, clad in faded pajamas and with hair tousled by sleep, huddled near a small table. Their tentative movements, their furtive glances toward the barely filled bag of food, spoke volumes of a life where even the simplest meal was a reminder of what was lacking. Every detail, each creak of the old floorboards, each sigh that escaped the tired breaths of the grandmother, spoke of a world that had little room for extravagance or indulgence. Instead, it was a world where survival and perseverance reigned supreme, where every morsel was hard-won, and every small smile was a victory against the odds. Robert's hardened eyes, so accustomed to the grand narratives of success, softened as he absorbed the scene. Here was Sophia, a woman whose name he knew only through carefully monitored work logs and performance reports, living in conditions that told a story of quiet sacrifice and unseen struggles. It was a stark contradiction to the notion that every employee was given an equal chance. Clearly, beneath the polished rhetoric of corporate equality, the reality for someone like Sophia was marked by hardships that no paycheck or bonus could erase. Standing there in the cool night, unseen and unheard, Robert felt a deep pang of regret for the assumptions he had long taken for granted. The financial reports, the quarterly earnings, and the boardroom debates had all obscured the simple human truth of what it meant to work tirelessly yet live modestly. In that modest apartment, lit by the soft glow of a single lamp and filled with echoes of whispered promises, he saw the vulnerable core of the very values his company claimed to uphold. The unmistakable disparity between corporate ideals and the hidden struggles of its quiet workers resonated with Robert in a way that he could no longer ignore. In that brief, painful observation of Sophia's private world, he recognized that the veneer of equal opportunity was cracked, revealing a human story that demanded attention and care. It was not enough to claim that everyone had equal chances. Real leadership required seeing beyond the numbers and acknowledging the person behind the paycheck. The person who, despite working grueling 16-hour shifts, still had the heart to ask quietly for a simple meal. As the distant sounds of the modest neighborhood mingled with his racing thoughts, Robert slowly turned away from the window, his mind awash with new resolve. This glimpse into Sophia's world challenged him to rethink what it truly meant to lead with compassion. In that humble, unadorned apartment, where a family clung together in the face of daily hardship, lay an invaluable lesson. That the worth of a person was measured not by the balance sheets, but by the dignity they maintained in the struggle. And that realization would soon prompt him to reconsider the very policies of his company, striving to turn rhetoric into meaningful action for the quiet, unseen heroes who built its success every day. In the days that followed his discreet observation of Sophia's modest apartment and the quiet resilience of her family, Robert Henley found that he could no longer remain a distant observer. The images of a worn-down stove barely able to warm 2 plain buns, of a frail grandmother resting in an old armchair, and of little sisters huddled together in faded pajamas, haunted him with a stark reminder of the lives hidden behind corporate numbers. Determined to understand the roots of this hardship, he decided to reach out directly. Late one afternoon, after a long day at the office, he arranged a private meeting with Sophia at a small neighborhood cafe that exuded warmth and simplicity, the antithesis of his own boardroom environment. At first, the meeting was quiet and tentative. Sophia, accustomed to a life of silent endurance in her double shifts, sat modestly at a worn wooden table with a cup of weak coffee. Robert, seated across from her in a surprisingly unguarded moment, began with simple, genuine questions about her life beyond the kitchen. "Sophia," he said in a gentle yet earnest tone, "I've noticed you are always the last to leave. Your dedication amazes us all. But I want to know more about you. I want to understand your story." His words were not those of a corporate executive delivering a memoir on performance metrics. They were a personal plea to see the human being behind the consistent work ethic. For several minutes, silence reigned. Then, as if the secure confines of the small cafe allowed a safe space for vulnerability, Sophia's gaze fell to her coffee cup. Her voice, trembling yet determined, finally broke the quiet. "I didn't choose this life," she began softly. "I had to choose it. I grew up in a busy, overcrowded neighborhood where every day was a struggle just to put food on the table. When I was a teenager, the weight of responsibility fell upon me. My mother, she fell ill when I was only 14, and we were soon left with little money after my father abandoned us long ago. I had to drop out of school to help support my siblings and myself." Her words came slowly at first, as though each syllable required careful release. "I remember the day I walked out of school like it was yesterday," she continued, her eyes distant but reflective. "I walked past the classrooms where I'd once dreamed of a different life, one filled with possibilities, ambitions, and hope. But instead of books and homework, I found only the harsh reality of putting in long hours to earn a living. I started working in kitchens, first as a dishwasher, then slowly moving up to prep work. Every shift was 16 hours long, every day a marathon of backbreaking labor, and yet I never complained. I thought my silence would keep the hardship at bay, as if by not speaking of it, I could somehow change my fate." Robert listened intently, finding himself leaning forward as Sophia unburdened pieces of her past. "I remember the nights I would lie awake, not because I didn't have food, but because I worried about my younger sisters waiting for me to return home safely. There were times when the only thing keeping me going was the thought that I had to be strong for them, even when I was completely exhausted." She paused, swallowing hard as memories bled into the present. "I've always felt invisible. At work, I'm the quiet one, the one who never causes trouble, who never asks for more than what's given. But what few people know is that my silence is not indifference. It's the echo of every sacrifice I've had to make." Robert's heart constricted as he absorbed the weight of her words. In his world of board meetings and polished figures, he had often touted the idea that everyone had equal opportunities. Yet here was Sophia, whose path had been filled with obstacles that no amount of corporate goodwill or equal policy could erase. The disparity between the promises of fairness he espoused and the silent struggles of someone like Sophia was jarring. "Sophia," he said softly, "I had no idea. Your strength is remarkable. The company's policies have always been about equal opportunity, but listening to you, I see that the playing field is far from level in reality." Her eyes, glistening with a mixture of sorrow and yearning, met his. "I've always managed to get through my shifts, even on days when I barely had anything to eat. I never thought someone in my position would matter much. I just worked as a way to survive." In that moment, Robert felt a profound sense of responsibility. More than ever, he realized his definitions of success and equality were incomplete without acknowledging the humanity of every single worker. The conversation suddenly took on a tone of determination as he promised, "I'm going to make sure that happens no longer. Your life and the lives of others like you will not be ignored. We must re-examine our systems, not just on paper, but in practice." Over the next hour, Sophia recounted more of her life, the early mornings in a cramped apartment with her siblings, the relentless pressure of balancing work with caring for an ailing grandmother, and the small rebellions of hope that kept her going despite it all. Her voice, at times breaking with anguish, also carried an undercurrent of resilience that struck Robert with awe. He came to understand that her request for leftovers the other night was not simply about hunger. It was the cry of a hard-working woman who sacrificed her own well-being to make sure others had what they needed. It was a quiet act of honesty that exposed the chasm between corporate rhetoric and human reality. By the time their conversation drew to a close, Robert was filled with a mixture of sorrow, admiration, and resolve. As he stepped out of the cafe into the cool Chicago dusk, he knew that this encounter had fundamentally changed his perspective. The story of Sophia was a testament, a painful yet inspiring reminder that behind every dismissed request or silent shift lay a human being whose dignity was far more significant than any balance sheet. In witnessing her struggle and resilience, Robert recognized that true equality begins with understanding and compassion for those whose voices are too often unheard. In the wake of his conversation with Sophia, and the haunting images of her modest apartment and the sacrifices etched into every corner of her life, Robert Henley returned to the sterile comfort of his office with a resolve that was both new and urgent. No longer could he afford to rely solely on quarterly reports and sleek corporate rhetoric that proclaimed equal opportunities, while quietly neglecting the basic human needs of his most dedicated staff. The disparity between the company's polished public image and the hidden hardships of those toiling behind the scenes was too glaring to ignore. That night, as he sat alone beneath the dim glow of his desk lamp, Robert drafted a list of immediate changes, each idea fueled by the raw honesty he had witnessed in Sophia's gentle plea and the unspoken struggles of her family. By early morning, with determination pulsing through his veins, Robert called an unscheduled meeting with his executive team and heads of operations. The conference room, usually reserved for strategic discussions and profit forecasts, became the stage for an impassioned address. Standing at the head of a long mahogany table, Robert's normally calm, measured tone carried an unmistakable gravity as he began. We have always prided ourselves on providing equal opportunities. Yet, recent revelations have forced me to confront a painful truth. Our internal policies are not meeting the very needs of those who make our success possible. His eyes swept over a group of stern-faced executives. No one should ever have to choose between working tirelessly on a shift and having a meal to keep themselves going. I witnessed something in our own ranks, a simple request for a basic necessity, that should never have been a cause for shame or compromise. Today, that must change. The room fell silent as Robert unveiled his new proposal. First, he introduced an initiative to revamp the company's employee benefits. He would implement a subsidized meal voucher program for every worker on the most demanding shifts. Every employee, he declared, regardless of position, must have access to a nutritious meal before the day ends. Not because we want to spend extra on overheads, but because we value every human being that contributes to our success. He outlined plans for improving the break rooms, ensuring they were equipped with proper appliances, comfortable seating, and even provisions for a hot, ready meal, so the after-hours hunger would no longer be a silent torment. In addition to the meal program, Robert presented a comprehensive review of the workload distribution. He acknowledged that the company's culture had long glorified going the extra mile, sometimes to the detriment of the workers' well-being. We must cultivate a policy where dedication does not equate to exploitation, he said solemnly. Our internal practices should empower every employee to be at their best without sacrificing their health or dignity. Detailed plans for flexible scheduling, even if it meant providing additional support on the heavier shifts, and transparent communication channels through which employees could submit their concerns without fear of retribution were laid out as key components of the new strategy. The executives exchanged surprised glances. Many had grown complacent with long-standing protocols that had become nothing more than silent habits, accepted as normal in pursuit of operational efficiency. Yet as Robert continued, his conviction resonated powerfully. I want to implement an internal program, a form of proactive support, if you will, that identifies the challenges our workers face. This will not be a top-down imposition but a collaborative effort. I'm establishing a task force, comprising representatives from all levels of our organization, that will be charged with reviewing and reshaping our policies to ensure that our rhetoric of equality becomes a practical reality. His voice, softened only marginally by the gravity of the commitment he was asking for, spoke not only to profitability but to the human price behind each shift. After the meeting, Robert's directives began to take shape. Over the following weeks, he worked closely with human resources and department heads to draft new guidelines, spending countless late nights reviewing feedback from frontline employees. He initiated confidential surveys and one-on-one meetings, inviting staff at every level to share their stories. Stories that had, until now, been muffled by the relentless pace of work and fear of retribution. Slowly but surely, the outlines of a more compassionate company began to appear. Financial allocations were diverted to improve employee welfare without compromising the company's competitive edge, and a pilot program was launched in the catering department, the heart of the operation where effort and exhaustion melded with the aroma of gourmet cuisine. In one of these follow-up meetings, an exhausted but sincere kitchen worker confessed, "I always thought it was just part of the job. Managing on little food, barely enough time to take a break. I never felt like I could ever ask for more without being seen as ungrateful." Robert listened intently, his heart heavy with the realization that decades of unchecked practices had caused silent suffering. "I used to believe that merit was measured solely by performance metrics," he admitted. "But I now see that true merit lies in the dignity and respect we afford one another. Every single person who works here deserves not just a paycheck, but a life that is nourished in every sense." The task force that emerged under his leadership became a beacon of change. They organized feedback sessions, listened to every grievance from the back office to the main kitchen, and charted a new path forward. A path where employees were treated holistically and their voices were not just heard, but acted upon. Policy memos were rewritten to include provisions for mental health support, emergency loans for unexpected hardships, and even professional development programs that sought to elevate each worker's future prospects. As the initiative began to take root, Robert Henley felt a quiet, transformative pride. The forthcoming board meeting would be a pivotal moment where he would present the restructured policy framework to the company's senior leadership, confident that these changes would not only improve lives but also inspire a culture of empathy that would ripple outwards into communities that they served. In that moment, his vision of a company was no longer confined to balance sheets and profit margins. It was a vibrant tapestry of human stories, resilience, and mutual care. Robert's journey from detached executive to compassionate leader was only just beginning, but already he sensed that the path ahead would redefine what it meant to lead. He recognized now that true leadership was found not in the might of authority, but in the tender act of listening to the whispers of pain, the quiet hopes of the unsung, and the voice of dignity that resounds even in the simplest request for a meal. A few weeks after the sweeping changes Robert had implemented, an air of cautious hope now permeated the corridors of the catering company. As the new policies began to take effect, Robert felt compelled to reach out personally to those whose lives had directly inspired the reform, including Sofia Martinez, whose silent struggles had once shaken the very foundation of his beliefs. One afternoon, under the soft light of late spring, Robert arranged a private meeting in a quiet conference room at the company headquarters. The room was simple, its walls adorned with tasteful art and a small potted plant in the corner, but it had an inviting warmth, a stark departure from the cold sterility of boardrooms past. Sophia arrived with her characteristic quiet resolve, her eyes downcast but with an inner strength that had carried her through long, exhausting days. As she stepped into the room, Robert greeted her with an unexpectedly gentle tone. "Sophia, thank you for coming," he began, his voice steady yet imbued with a tenderness that she had never heard from him before. "I wanted to speak with you one-on-one because I believe you deserve more than just corporate platitudes. I want to understand you, not just as an employee, but as a person whose story has opened my eyes." Over a modest pot of tea that Robert had prepared in advance, the conversation slowly unfolded. At first, Sophia spoke in measured, careful sentences, recounting her daily routine in the kitchen, the relentlessness of the 16-hour shifts, and how she never spared a complaint even when hunger crept upon her at the end of a grueling day. She described the days when she would catch herself stealing a moment to ask for a humble meal, an act of desperation that she had long learned to swallow in silence. Robert listened intently, nodding with each soft-spoken admission, his eyes never leaving hers as if to reassure her that every word was being heard and taken to heart. As they talked, the conversation naturally shifted to her past, a life that stretched far beyond the confines of the catering company. Sophia hesitated, as though each memory weighed heavily before she allowed it to surface. "I had dreams once," she said quietly. "I used to believe in beauty, art, and the power of creativity. But life had other plans. I had to leave my studies and my aspirations behind to support my family. I sacrificed my own ambitions so my younger sisters could have a future. And while I do what needs to be done every day, a part of me still aches for that lost opportunity." Her voice wavered, and in that moment, the quiet strength she always exuded began to crack. Robert's eyes softened further as he realized that behind the steady hands and punctual work ethic lay years of unspoken grief and relentless sacrifice. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, tears gathered in Sophia's eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back, but as the memories spilled forth, of cold nights spent with little more than 2 buns and scraps from the kitchen, of an ailing grandmother whose frailty was a constant reminder of loss, and of a childhood abruptly marred by hardship, the dam broke. For the first time in many long years, Sophia could no longer contain her sorrow. A single tear rolled down her cheek, then another, until a quiet trail of tears shimmered on her face. The vulnerability in her expression was raw and unfiltered, a silent testament to the long-buried pain of years spent in quiet endurance. Robert reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his. "Sophia, I'm so sorry," he murmured, his voice thick with genuine remorse and compassion. "I had no idea you carried so much pain within you. I always believed in equal opportunity, but I now see that true equality isn't just about policies and procedures. It's about caring for the person behind the role, truly seeing them." His words, sincere and unembellished, offered a sense of comfort that seemed to slightly ease the weight of her grief. Between sobs, Sophia managed to explain how each day felt like a battle, a relentless struggle to wed her own dignity with the harsh reality of living on what felt like society's leftovers. "Every shift, every missed meal. It's like my voice has been stolen, not by choice, but by the sheer necessity of surviving," she whispered, her eyes locked on Robert's compassionate gaze. "I never wanted anyone to see me as weak or needy, so I buried it all inside. But tonight, I just couldn't hold it in anymore." For a long, quiet while, the only sounds in the room were the soft sniffles and the faint tapping of rain against the window pane. Robert sat silently, absorbing every word and every tear, feeling deeply the injustice that had been hidden in plain sight all those years. His earlier resolve to change the company's approach had now crystallized into a commitment that went far beyond policy. Here, in this private moment, he understood that leadership meant embracing the imperfect, sometimes painful stories of the human spirit. When Sophia finally managed to compose herself, Robert continued gently, "Sophia, I want you to know that today marks the beginning of something new, not just for the company, but for you personally. Your story has taught me that our true strength is in bearing the burdens of those who have been voiceless for far too long. I promise you that we will do everything in our power to ensure that you and others in similar situations are given the support and care you deserve." Her eyes, still red but now glistening with a fragile hope, met his. In that silent exchange, a new understanding blossomed, a mutual commitment to redefine what dignity looked like in a corporate world that often overlooked the most vulnerable. For Robert, the experience was an awakening, a reminder that every policy, however well-intended, was meaningless unless it recognized the full humanity of those it affected. The conversation lingered well past the fading light of day, each of them sharing stories that had long been confined within the shadows. For the first time, Sophia let herself be seen, not as a background worker, but as a resilient, complex individual whose tears were not a sign of weakness, but a release of years of pent-up emotion. And Robert, who had once prided himself on his detached, analytical approach to business, learned that true leadership was about connecting with the individual stories that composed the heartbeat of his company. A year later, the corridors of the catering company in Chicago had transformed into living proof of change. The once impersonal, high-pressure environment had given way to a culture of empathy and human connection, a shift initiated by Robert Henley's sincere resolve to look beyond the numbers on a timesheet. With new policies in place that ensured better working conditions and consistent access to nutritious meals, employees no longer struggled in silence. But one initiative shone brighter than the rest: a comprehensive program to support the growth and development of the company's unsung heroes. At its very heart stood Sofia Martinez, whose quiet perseverance had inspired a radical rethinking of corporate responsibility. Now recognized not merely as a diligent worker but as a valued human being with an extraordinary story, Sofia was offered an opportunity that would forever change not only her life but also the lives of many in the community. With Robert's unwavering support and the full backing of the company, Sofia took a leap from satisfying daily demands into the realm of mentorship and education. A space where she could share her passion for food, her culinary skills, and her resilient spirit. Their transformation manifesto had become much more than an internal policy revision. It was a movement to uplift everyone who had ever been overlooked. It was time, Robert mused, to extend these opportunities beyond the confines of the company's kitchen and into the community. Under the new vision, the company allocated an unused storage hall in one of its commercial properties to be converted into a culinary training center. A warm, inviting space designed especially for young girls from low-income families. The space was renovated meticulously. Old cement floors were overlaid with a polished, warm-toned surface. Patched-up walls were repainted in cheerful colors, and large windows were installed to let in the natural Chicago light. A state-of-the-art kitchen was set up, though modest in scale, with shiny utensils, sturdy work tables, and a wall lined with vibrant ingredients and spices. This was not just a training center. It was a sanctuary for hope, creativity, and dignity. On the day of the grand opening, a soft buzz of excitement filled the transformed hall. In the morning mist, a small group of young girls hesitantly arrived. Their faces, etched with the uncertainties of a hard life, slowly brightened as they were greeted by Sofia, who stood at the front of the kitchen with gentle pride and quiet determination. Dressed in a neat apron and exuding every bit of the focused grace that had made her indispensable at the catering company, Sofia welcomed each student with warmth and encouragement. She explained that today they would learn the basics of preparing a meal, a lesson not only in culinary arts but also in taking pride in oneself and one's heritage. With careful demonstrations, Sofia showed the girls how to measure out flour, dice vegetables, and knead dough with a rhythm reminiscent of a long-forgotten dance. Every chopping stroke, every stir of the mixing bowl, was imbued with subtle passion and a determination to forge a better future. As she spoke, her soft, reassuring tone bridged the gap between her own scars and the dreams of those eager to learn. The girls listened intently, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and aspiration as they absorbed each instruction and story. Stories of sacrifices made during long shifts, of nights spent on cold floors with only scraps for sustenance, and of a secret strength that propelled them beyond their circumstances. During the session, one of the girls, quiet and curious, leaned forward and asked softly, "Miss Sofia, will we learn to cook real food that makes us feel strong?" Sofia's eyes shone with heartfelt conviction as she replied, "Yes, my dear. Food isn't just something you eat. It's a way to nurture your soul. Every bite, every recipe, is a chance to honor your journey and to build the life you deserve." In that moment, the culinary class became more than a technical session. It blossomed into a forum of empowerment, a stepping stone toward reclaiming dignity and hope. As the classes continued over subsequent weeks and months, the transformation was palpable. The once timid girls grew in confidence, taking pride in their achievements. Their little hands became more skilled with each session, mastering the art of creating dishes that were as much a celebration of local culture as they were a testament to the resilience born of hardship. Community leaders took note, and soon local press featured small articles about the program and its profound impact. In every testimonial, the common theme was clear. True empowerment begins when one finds the courage to embrace one's own identity and to share one's talents with the world. Robert Henley, now a regular visitor to the center, watched these developments with a sense of pride and humility. In meetings with his executive team, he enthusiastically recounted the story of how a quiet request for a simple meal had become the catalyst for a comprehensive overhaul of company practices. Observing the passion with which Sophia nurtured the young talent before her, he recognized that the true measure of leadership was not in rigid policies or bottom-line figures, but in the ability to see, value, and cultivate the human spirit. In a final, heartfelt moment during the annual company celebration, Robert addressed the gathered crowd. "I once believed that leadership meant running a company," he declared, his voice resonating with honest emotion. "But today, I have learned that true leadership begins with seeing the person behind the role." Sophia has shown us that every number on a timesheet represents a life with its own story of sacrifice, resilience, and vibrant hope. I stand here not as a commander of profit margins, but as a leader who understands that our greatest asset is our people. His words, sincere and impactful, left a lasting imprint on everyone present. He thought he was running the company, but she taught him that true leadership begins when you see the person, not the timesheet. Subscribe if you believe that dignity is not a title.